cut off in the last video. Uh, Homeostatic imbalances of the adrenal glands also include hyposecretion, which would be Addison's disease. That usually involves deficits in both glucocorticoids and mineralocorticoids. So we get decrease in plasma glucose and sodium levels, leading to weight loss, severe dehydration, hypotension, low blood pressure, and are common symptoms. It is treated with corticosteroid replacement therapy. Early signs is a characteristic bronzing of the skin, almost looking tan, and that's due to high levels of ACTH, which triggers melanin production in melanocytes. And there are those who believe that John Kennedy suffered from Addison's disease, and had not the bullet killed him, this would have been a health issue that may have done him in. As an aside, fun fact. So here is the humped buffalo hump on the Cushing patient, the kind of almost swollen face of a Cushing's patient. This is before and after. The gonatocorticoids are adrenal sex hormones. They are weak androgens, weak forms of testosterone converted to testosterone in tissues or cells, some to estrogens, androstenedione, DHEA. I'm not even going to try to pronounce that. And these could contribute to the onset of puberty and appearance of secondary sex characteristics. They may be involved in the sex drive of women, and they are the source of estrogens in postmenopausal women. Hypersecretion, adrenogenital syndrome, or masculinization would not be noticeable in adult males. They are already masculinized with testosterone, so it really doesn't have an effect. In females and pre-puberty males, the boys' reproductive organs mature, secondary sex characteristics emerge early. Females can end up with male secondary sex characteristics. The adrenal medulla is medullary chromaffin cells. They synthesize catecholamines, the epinephrine and norepinephrine, and those have vasoconstriction rates, increasing heart rates, increasing blood glucose levels, and blood gets diverted to the brain, the heart, and the skeletal muscles from those. This is, again, part of our fight or flight response. Both hormones have the same effect. Epinephrine is more stimulator of metabolic activities, of bronchial dilation, blood flow to skeletal muscles and heart, whereas norepinephrine is more of an influence on peripheral vasoconstriction and blood pressure. So the responses to these are from stress, and they are brief by comparison to the cortical hormones. Stress and the adrenal gland is a great topic, and perhaps it is being more and more thought that our stressors, things that shouldn't really stress us but do, are leading to some of the problems we have with type 2 diabetes and other things. So low secretion of epinephrine and norepinephrine, they're not essential to life. There are no problems associated with low secretion. Too much secretion, though, leads to symptoms of uncontrolled sympathetic nervous system, hyperglycemia, increased metabolic rate, rapid heartbeat, palpitations, hypertension, intense nervousness, and sweating. That can be due to pheochromocytoma, which is a tumor of chromaffin cells. And these are outlined in Table 16.5. I would encourage you to look it over closely. The pineal gland is a small gland hanging from the roof of the third ventricle in the brain. It has got pineal cytes, which secrete melatonin, which is derived from serotonin. We don't really know what it does, but there are evidence to suggest it's involved in the timing of sexual maturation and puberty, in our day-night cycles, physiological process that slows rhythmic variations, the body temperature goes up and down with during the day and night, sleep patterns, appetite. It's a production, also encourages production of antioxidant detoxification molecules in cells. So here again are the glands, from the pineal gland down to the testes would be the lowest in males, ovaries in females. But there are many other organs that contribute hormones. Pancreas is located partly behind the stomach, has both exocrine and endocrine cells. The acinar cells are exocrine cells. They produce enzyme-rich juice for digestion that we'll talk about in the next chapter. The islet cells, pancreatic islets, traditionally known as islets of Langerhans, have the endocrine cells, which include alpha cells producing glucagon and beta cells producing insulin. Glucagon is a very potent hyperglycemic agent. It's triggered by the decrease of blood glucose levels, raising amino acid levels or sympathetic nervous system. It's going to raise blood sugar levels by breaking down glycogen into glucose, that's glycogenolysis, and synthesizing glucose from lactic acid and other non-carbohydrates, gluconeogenesis, and then releasing that glucose into the blood. Insulin, on the other hand, is secreted when blood glucose levels increase. It's synthesized as proinsulin and then modified. It works to enhance membrane transport of glucose into fat cells and muscle cells. It inhibits the breakdown of glycogen to glucose, and it inhibits the conversion of amino acids to fats or glucose. Insulin is not needed for glucose uptake in some organs, such as the liver, the kidney, or the brain. It does play a role in neural development, learning, and memory. Binding to tyrosine kinase enzyme is going to trigger the cell to increase glucose uptake. Insulin also triggers cells to catalyze oxidation of glucose for ATP production. That's its first priority. To polymerize glucose to form glycogen, and to convert glucose to fat, particularly in adipose tissue. Factors that influence insulin release include elevated blood glucose levels, raising blood levels of amino acids and fatty acids, a release of acetylcholine by the parasympathetic nervous fibers, hormones, glucagon, epinephrine, growth hormone, thyroxine, glucocorticoids, somatostatin, and the sympathetic nervous system inhibit insulin release. So here is our classic teeter-totter, balancing our blood glucose levels between glucagon and insulin. So diabetes mellitus is type 1 or type 2. The three cardinal signs of diabetes mellitus are polyuria, polydipsia, and polyphagia. Huge urine output, excessive thirst, and excessive hunger and food consumption. Sugars can't be used as fuel when someone has diabetes mellitus. The fats are used, causing lipidemia, which are high levels of fatty acids in the blood. And the metabolism of fat can lead to the formation of ketones, or ketone bodies. And ketones are acidic, and their buildup in the blood can cause ketoacidosis or ketonuria. And untreated ketoacidosis can cause hypernia, disrupted heart activity, disrupted oxygen transport, and severe depression of nervous system, which can lead to coma and sometimes leads to death. Ketoacidosis. Hyperinsulinism is excessive insulin secretion, causes hypoglycemia, low blood glucose levels. These symptoms would include anxiety, nervousness, disorientation, unconsciousness, even death in extreme cases. Giving sugar to someone with hyperinsulinism is going to affect a quick fix. Okay, let's see what they have to say.
The sugary snack you devour enters your digestive system and is broken down to simple sugars like glucose. Glucose enters the bloodstream, causing an increase in blood glucose levels. But various mechanisms bring blood glucose back down to its normal level, the set point. This is an example of homeostasis, the body's tendency to maintain relatively constant internal conditions. Hormones produced by the pancreas regulate blood glucose levels. Let's zoom in. When blood glucose levels are high, glucose molecules leave the blood and enter beta cells in the pancreas. The beta cells respond by releasing the hormone insulin. Insulin enters the bloodstream and is transported to cells all over the body. Let's see what happens in the liver. Insulin binds to receptors on liver cells. This causes the cells to take in more glucose. Inside the liver cells, glucose is converted to glycogen, a storage molecule. Blood glucose levels decrease as glucose is taken up by liver cells and other body cells. As a result, less and less insulin is released by the pancreas, and blood glucose levels stabilize at their set point. This is an example of how negative feedback maintains homeostasis. What happens if you've skipped lunch and your blood glucose levels are low? Let's zoom into the pancreas again. When blood glucose levels are low, alpha cells in the pancreas release the hormone glucagon. Glucagon enters the bloodstream and acts on target cells in the liver. Glucagon binds to receptors on the liver cells, signaling the liver cells to break glycogen down to glucose. Glucose is released. And blood glucose levels increase. As a result, less glucagon is released by the pancreas, and blood glucose levels stabilize at their set point. In this way, two hormones with opposing effects allow the body to maintain homeostasis of blood glucose levels. In diabetes, the body is unable to maintain homeostasis of blood glucose levels. In type 1 diabetes, the beta cells of the pancreas are destroyed by the immune system, and so no insulin is produced. In type 2 diabetes, the pancreas produces insulin, but target cells do not take up glucose. In both types of diabetes, when blood glucose levels rise, cells do not take up the additional glucose, and so blood glucose remains high. This example shows the importance of homeostasis in everyone's life.
Okay. So now we go to the gonads and the placenta. The gonads produce the same steroid sex hormones as those of the adrenal cortex, just in lesser amounts. Ovaries produce estrogens and progesterone. They work for maturation of reproductive organs, appearance of secondary sexual characteristics. With progesterone, they cause breast development and cyclic changes in the uterine mucosa. Testes would produce testosterone, which initiates maturation of male reproductive organ, causes the appearance of male secondary sex characteristics, sex drive, necessary for normal sperm production, and helps to maintain the reproductive organs in a functional state. Placenta secretes estrogens, progesterone, and human chorionic gonadotrophin, HCG. Other organs, adipose tissue, adipose cells release leptin, which is involved in appetite control, resistin, which is an insulin antagonist, adiponectin, which enhances the sensitivity to insulin. Gastrointestinal tract secretes hormones such as gastrin, ghrelin, secretin, cholecytokinin, CCK, as I usually call it, and incretins, all of which are involved in the digestive system, and we'll look at those in the next chapter on digestive system. And the heart, we've talked before, produces ANP, or atrial natriuretic peptide, which decreases sodium concentrations in the blood and therefore blood pressure and blood volume. In the kidneys, we have erythropoietin, which signals the production of red blood cells, and renin, that initiates the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone mechanism. And skeletal system, osteoblasts secrete osteocalcin, which helps the pancreas to secrete more insulin, restricts fat storage, improves glucose handling, and reduces body fat. It's activated by insulin, and low levels of osteocalcin are present in type 2 diabetes. Maybe increasing the levels would be a possible new treatment option being explored. In the skin, we have calciferol, which is a precursor to vitamin D. Calcitrol is an active form of vitamin D. Also modulates immunity, decreases inflammation, may act as an anti-cancer agent. In the thymus, which is large in infants and children and shrinks with age, we produce thymulin, thymopoietins, and thymosins are involved in normal development of T cells and the immune response. They called hormones, but they're actually more acting as paracrines, and again, we'll talk more about these when we talk about the chapter on immunity. Developmentally, the hormone-producing glands arise from all three germ layers. There is evidence for some environmental pollutants to have an effect on the endocrine system. Throughout life, most endocrine organs operate well till old age. Growth hormone declines with age. Thyroid hormone declines with age. Parathyroid hormone remains relatively constant, but with the lack of estrogen, it makes some older women more vulnerable, perhaps, to the demineralizing effects of parathyroid hormone. Glucose tolerance deteriorates with age. Ovaries undergo significant changes. Testosterone diminishes with age, but it's usually not seen as an effect until very old age. And that will wrap up our endocrine chapter.